What's happening, savages? My name is Immortal Coil, and today is the first of hopefully weekly shows hosted on my channel. The name of this show is Savage Spirituality, and is named so because of my approach and perspective upon life, which I'll be going into momentarily. This is my first broadcast, so I'm kind of learning as we go. I apologize if anything that I do seems like a neophyte, but that's exactly what I am right now. And hopefully making some new friends as we go. So, let's see here. Probably should share this on YouTube. Okay. Send out a couple of notifications. Okay, there we go. All right, so the first most obvious question that I get asked is, what is up with your name? What is an immortal coil? Why is it spelled all silly? Well, part of that is branding, obviously. A lot of that is also trying to make it so that my audience comes to me. If you know who I am and you know what I do and how I do it, then this will all make sense to you. Keep away riffraff, that sort of thing. Not trying to be a hipster idiot, but I've been called worse. Immortal Coil itself. This is a name that refers back to DNA. Um, I'm a big believer in the immortal spirit, and the mortal coil is a play on the term of physical body. So the immortal coil, the spirit that can't die, the thing that lives on. And then you may be wondering about my avatar. I have a crystal skull there. That is the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull, which is generally considered to be authentic, even though some claim that there's jeweler's marks and all that kind of stuff. The story goes that the skull was found in the jungles of South America by a 17-year-old girl, and she brought it to her father, who was its custodian, until he passed. Then it passed to the daughter. The daughter held on to it until she died, and now it's in the care of a Canadian gentleman, I believe. Uh, the legends go that there are 13 crystal skulls that are imprinted with some type of knowledge uh, that will be special for mankind when they're assembled. And how they're accessed, who knows? Maybe it's a psychic endeavor. Uh, I guess that's remaining to be seen. However, in trying to create an avatar for my YouTube channel and for well, pretty much everywhere where I go, I wanted to have something that was singular and distinctive, and not just some loud image that make people kind of chuckle. This is also meant to draw you in. What exactly is this thing? Why is this dude a skull, a yellow skull? I don't know that everybody realizes it's a crystal skull right up front, but there you go. The skull itself is clear in color, but the photographer, and this photograph was taken in the 70s. The photographer obviously was using a golden colored light, so we get this sort of amber hue. Uh, Very interesting stuff. I'm in this position now where I don't really like to talk about myself, but I'm sort of forced to. I need everybody to understand what my qualifications are, as it were, for you know, why should we even be listening to you in the first place? The biggest thing, the biggest thing is that the type of life that I have led and the experiences that I've had, honestly, some of them could have come off an episode of the X Files. I'm not afraid to go public with this and say I am one that has pierced the veil, seen the other side, and come back to talk about it. Now, I'm not going to do it in an obvious shove it down your throat way because I consider that to be proselytizing. And it's not something that I appreciate other people doing to me. So I don't try to do that to other people. But in hosting a show like this, it's very important to understand uh, where this perspective is coming from and what some of the comments and observations I have to make, why they're maybe valid or not. Now, and having said that, my experiences are just that. They're my experiences. I don't expect anybody to account for the veracity of what I have to say. And if my experience differs from yours, that's fine too. Take from it what commonalities you might have, leave the rest behind, and just kind of consider it a silly little aside. Okay. Uh, the best way to get into this is to kind of start from a common ground. Most people's concept of religion or spirituality is based on their experiences at temple or at mass or in the circle or whatever you want to call that. I've certainly dabbled in all of those arenas, but and when I talk to other what I would call sensitives, um, it seems like especially for the people in my generation, like we're sort of born with a certain knowledge on our hand, and we can't explain it to ourselves right away, but we know it when we know it. And not only that, we recognize uh, the truth of what we know when we're confronted by human concepts of it. Um, and that's like an intense curiosity into all things non-physical, the things that science doesn't quite understand yet, and the things that are really more of like a inner personal reflection. Uh, at this point, we have exactly 0 people watching, which is fine. Um, I don't expect this particular stream to be hugely popular, but it will be interesting to go back later on and kind of compare notes. As the show goes on, I have a number of guests lined up so that we can explore some of this stuff together. And even in, let's say, considering what type of show this should be, um, if you've seen me before on live streams, I'm usually a guest. So being a guest has different rules than being the host. When you're the guest, you let the host set the tempo. You kind of support and make backup jokes. You make observations, and then you have to share space with other people, which is fine. Um, but the thing is, the stuff in my head isn't really in everybody's head. I've gotten enough feedback that these sort of topics are thoughtful and people like to ponder upon them. But I haven't seen, especially in the fandom menace, where a particular openness to this, except our friends in the exozone, um, an openness to unexplained phenomenon. And I'm going to say those in air quotes because it's unexplained to physical science, but those who know. Um, I also, like many of you, probably wake up early and get in the car and you're driving to work ready to sell your time so that you can engage in your YouTube hobby. And morning radio people are just idiots. They're so annoying. All they do is yakety yak and jaw jack and talk shit about stuff that they're paid to promote. You know, uh, McDonald's commercials or what Kim Kardashian's ass looked like in the thong of the week. And they're just loud and annoying. So trying to listen to stuff like that, what were the type of radio programs that I enjoyed listening to? Um, the big answer right away is somebody like Art Bell. He wasn't afraid to get into some of the uh, high strangeness, as he would call it. Um, and then the other sort of programs that I enjoyed were more like intellectual game shows or kind of comedic game shows. I like to laugh and have a good time. Uh, But my favorite type of shows and discussions are really just normal people kind of bullshitting. And you'd be surprised, bullshitting about far out topics is actually one of the more ponderous things you can do with your time. Matter of fact, I'm sitting here with an adult beverage of my choice, uh, sipping some Jim Beam, and then backing it with a beer. So good old Boilermaker. Let's go ahead and salute, raise them if you got them. Yeah, some pretty good stuff. So yeah, just enjoy your libation, love your woman, love your man, whatever you're into, as long as it's legal. Speak the truth, and be there for your friends. Right? That's all we can ask. Let's see here. So, what is savage spirituality? Well, that's it's a way of looking at life. Um, Now, you may be whatever faith, whatever belief system, whatever kind of uh, whatever your understanding is. I've come to believe that nobody, no human, no incarnate being, even if you're not human, has a right to interpose himself between the creator and the self. It's one thing to invite inquiry or compare notes in a friendly way, but to say that I have domain over you just because I believe this, or our institution has been around for longer than Adam, uh, is a real fallacy. I don't appreciate that, and I don't appreciate people who act that way. Uh, and it's just also a personal belief. If you want to go to temple or hold circle or whatever, cool. I don't necessarily believe that you have to do that in any special place. The universe is my church, if you want to reduce it down to those terms. Um, Along the way went a lot of research. You can't really well consider yourself a learned person or have some sort of idea of your belief system if you haven't compared that to other belief systems. Because we live in this relativistic universe, we're able to determine our truth only by comparing it to the truths of others. And once you found that truth, it's special and sacred, and indeed, you turn it into a part of your identity. Uh, but that's just it. It's your truth. So that's the name that I've chosen to give into that perspective. Um, and the more that you dig into the nature of the state of affairs on planet Earth as it relates to terroring humans, the more kind of unbelievable shit you'll come across. But the more unbelievable is what we consider normal everyday reality. This idea of waking up and going to work and clocking in and doing something and eating lunch and then clocking out and going home and watching TV or playing on your computer and then wash, rinse, repeat. Um, I believe life was supposed to be a greater adventure than that, but we've kind of thought ourselves into a little stone wall. And it's really hard to shake through that illusion, especially if you're not even aware that an illusion exists in the first place. Uh, I always have. I've always been bored with how people conduct themselves. And when grown-ups or powers that be or authority figures tell you have to do something, my immediate reaction was always, why? Why do I need to do this? How is this going to, and they're just like, well, that's just the way it is. That's what we do. That's what people do. That's how you people. Well, no, no thanks. I'll play the game so long as I have to, but that's not what life's about. And if you think that going to, I don't know, going to work and all that kind of stuff and making money and all that for what would you call it? How long do people normally work? 50 years, something like that. They retire at 65. They die at 72. Uh, and what's to show for it? I think actually it's not really until a lot of people are facing oblivion that they start to wonder if their time on Earth was worthwhile. Um, and I've been around the block a couple times. I was this body, this mouth that's talking at you, was born in 1981, and I've done pretty much every type of job you can do, or every kind of field you can do, except for lewd or lascivious acts. I try to say my lewd and lasciviousness for my friends and loved ones. Um, Pause for some whiskey. But you get a lot of comparative backgrounds. Um, I've been a salesman. I've been a janitor. I've been a manual worker. I've been a laborer. I've worked at stores. I've taken care of dogs. I've been a massage therapist. I've taught martial arts. Um, I've been an author. I'm a published author. I don't use my real name. Much like Immortal Coil, I use a pseudonym. Uh, but what that really means is that jack of all trades, master of none. And remember being in school and we used to have to take these tests to figure out what our talent lies, right? And I always scored the highest in communication. And it's like, I wonder what I should do with that. Um, and how do I succeed? How can I put myself in a position where my ability to communicate is what drives my income, right? Uh, and I pondered that for many, many years. I thought I was going to be a professional guitar player until I was like 25, maybe 26. And the musical situation I was in fizzled out on itself. And then later on, I became a father and all that kind of stuff. Which isn't to say I don't value that time. Making music is a very sacred thing if you put conscious effort and conscious thought into it. But the idea of just writing something stupid so you can have a hit and go ooh, ah, and have people shake their head, that's not why I got into music. You know, um, you look at somebody like Randy Rhoads, who was a very very talented guitar player, but he cared about the craft of music as much as he cared about his teased out hairdo and his polka dot guitar. Uh, so yeah, music was a big thing. I also was a, I like to draw and write poems and short stories and weird things like that. Photoshop is definitely an interesting uh, skill. A lot of my friends and associates are pretty good at Photoshop, in many other ways than I am. But the ability to convey an idea, something that exists in your brainstem as just some loose thought, and either tell a story or bring something out of yourself, um, is a crazy idea. And then when you find stories like that that resonate with people, who enough people are like, my time has convinced me that there's something to that, and then they respond on a very visceral level. Storytelling and creative art are so very important to society. It's really our fundamental thing because since uh, humans were made, we've been telling stories. We've been told the story, and we kept on going with it and permutating it and every sort of thing our collective consciousness encounters. We turn that into the story of us, or why we decided to do a certain thing or adopt certain behaviors or mannerisms or speech patterns, why you dress the way you dress, why you decided to eat this instead of that. It's all self reflection, it's all expression and creative expression. Uh, I also believe like art's been with us since we've been created. Even if the first thing that humans learned how to do is grab a stick and then draw something in the dirt, or create some pigment, throw it over your hand, and then there's a cave wall, right? Uh, Many would argue humans were taught art and writing. I would be one of them, and that's a big, big topic. That's something that I hope to dig into as this show goes on in the future. How wisdom was lowered from the heavens, gifted to mankind. Okay. Now, if storytelling and communication and artistic expression and sharing inborn ideas with people is one of the crux of human civilization, the story that you find yourself in, the challenge is really, how do I communicate that story? How do I do it in a way that other people will respond to? And that's a good question. I've told you about my outlets. Being a writer, I enjoy reading other people's writings. So I've done a lot of that. Reading is a very outdated skill these days, it seems. When we do read something, it's either because we have to for work or school, or it's usually something very vapid like the modern press. Uh, there's a couple of streams that I regularly participate in as guest stars. The most prominent is probably the Fourth Wave, which is on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Now there's various permutations of that, but you know, check with the Fourth Wave and you can pretty much figure out whenever we're streaming. Um, and as we found out on the Fourth Wave, the mainstream press is very puzzled with what to do with us. So they do what they do best, which is just kind of make up stuff. My good friend Stephen Walton wrote a book chronicling, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But let's say he wrote a book, and the book's not sitting well with the grown-ups because it runs contrary to the yarn they're trying to weave, right? Um, but that's more of like a entertainment commentary related stream where it's like news and topical events. Um, I also regularly stream with Black Angus Reviews. He has a good show called Utter Chaos, which is just pure good old fuckery. You know, we get on there, we make loud noises, we laugh, we joke, we jest, and you know, we run with that. Uh, Black Angus is a good friend of mine. I owe a lot of my success at this point to him for finding me and, excuse me, encouraging me to get out there and put myself out there. It's a big shout out to him. Check him out. And then my own personal channel, I try to I'm trying to find my own voice. I think I got a pretty good one. I just don't want to engage in the same kind of article chasing that most of my peers are engaging in. So really, it's just a question of how to express yourself. I'm a very uncommon person in a lot of ways. I look like a regular dude, and I'm not really like a super attractive, so I'm not going to be doing a lot of screen sharing. Actually, a lot of people say I look intimidating or like I look mad or angry or something. I don't necessarily believe so, but I'm also stuck in my own skin. So when people speak of perceptions, the only thing I have to compare it to is just how it feels to be alive. Um, I'll admit, like, I'm a peace-loving person, but the brutality of this planet uh, really makes you have to change some of the ways that you would rather be. It would be nice to be all about love and peace and rainbows and fluffy kitty poo poo, but reality's not like that. There's definitely users and predators out there that you have to fortify against. You know, I believe I'm inherently nonviolent, but I've found myself having to use violence out of necessity from time to time. it doesn't make me feel good. It's just you acknowledge where you are at and respond accordingly. And then in my own personal life, okay, I've been through situations where, uh, believe it or not, things went not as expected. So I had to improvise and adapt and hopefully overcome. But those things are hard to come by consciously. I don't know how better to say that. Like, sure, you do it out of necessity, but it doesn't feel good and you don't necessarily want to, especially if we're talking about ends of relationships or changes in living situations, that sort of thing. Beer chaser. And then as storytelling changes, well, the storytelling itself doesn't change. I would say like the medium through which we get our storytelling is what changes. Um, Growing up in the 80s, I was probably amongst the last of the generation who remember before all this technology explosion, who actually had to go outside and play and throw rocks and climb trees. We did have video game systems. We had gaming consoles and computers, but nothing that was smart, nothing that was anything like we have now in the power of our hands. Because of all the research that I've done, I've some of my perspective is what some people would call like wearing a tinfoil hat. Okay, I'll cop to that. That's fine. There's some really weird stuff out there that doesn't mean us any good as a race, so far as just keeping us docile and complacent. Uh, and for me, smartphones were one of those gadgets. I had the hardest time getting into it because I didn't want to put all my stuff out there, and I didn't want to feel like I'm walking around with a GPS where Big Brother can just like look at me on the toilet anytime they wanted to. Um, and sure, there's some of that. There's legitimate reasons to think those things, but what I was overlooking at that time was that I had a powerful communications tool, and instead of just reading a book or something like that, I could watch multimedia presentations from thoughtful people through YouTube. Now, when I first found YouTube, this was early 2000s. There was the silly stuff that like the chocolate rain guy. There was like the dramatic gopher and things like that. So people were just kind of like using it as jokes, and that's probably what most people do. I don't know how many people actually go onto YouTube to stretch their brain, but hopefully there's more than just me. Hopefully you are too. I wasn't. I was going through kind of a rough time when I started getting really serious about this. I had a relationship that ended. Uh, the person I had a child with didn't want to continue the relationship anymore. So I was asked to leave. I lived by myself. I got into a little bit of trouble. Found myself on a house arrest for a little while, and then I decided, no, I want to do something better with myself. So I got a loan and I took a couple of college classes, and because of the loan that I took out, I was able to pay for rent for a couple months and just really focus on that. And the way that I grew up, very much, in some ways, like all American kind of, you know, boy playing any yard kind of stuff. But I was always interested in like superheroes, and I watched cartoons like He-Man and Thundercats. Uh, later on, got into the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man and Batman was on back then. All the movies that came out. Really big X-Men fan. If any of you guys have seen what I look like, I make no qualms about being Wolverine, right? All right, we got the rookie critic. What's happening, man? You are my first listener. Thanks for checking this out, man. So anyway, we were living in a highly imaginative landscape. Uh, Storytelling and the types of stories that were being made around, heroes, uh, really got me thinking about uh, modern mythology. I guess I didn't know to call it that as a kid, just kind of passively taking it in. But when you go back and start reading comic books and reading what the authors were into and talking about, uh, you get the sense that there was something larger that they were trying to tap into. And sometimes they did that consciously, and sometimes they were just trying to make a buck so they can get, you know, right, their 40 acres and their mule, right? Excuse me. Um, yeah. So what I found with YouTube, uh, I would use it for escapist reasons. Due to no fault of my own, I found myself walking quite a bit. Well, actually, it was totally my fault, but I would walk to work, like usually 2 to 5 miles a day, and I would put headphones on and listen to my favorite YouTubers. And I'm a big Star Wars geek, huge. And I knew stuff about Star Wars that not everybody knew, and I didn't think that anybody else cared about it as much as I did. But then I got on YouTube and I found out that there were like even nerdier nerds than myself, and they knew everything. So I'd sit there and devour videos, and big Darth Vader fan. Uh, find out everything I could. I remember when Revenge of the Sith came out, and I was just so about it. Darth Vader is my all-time favorite Star Wars guy, just because of the many different ways you can psychoanalyze the guy, and then telekinesis and all that kind of stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later. Uh, and this was in the lull between the Force Awakens and the Last Jedi. The Force Awakens, I was kind of like, yeah, okay. It was enough to go on for the moment. Uh, but the big thing that we were all doing, I wasn't actively doing it. I was just kind of doing it vicariously. We were speculating and making theories about what the next installment could be like. And everybody, I think everybody, we wanted to see Luke Skywalker be badass because we saw him as a little kid. Well, not a little kid. We saw him as a petulant teenager. We saw him get his ass kicked by Darth Vader. We saw him bring Darth Vader back from the dark side. And then we saw the smiling Force ghost. And then it's, you know, da-da, da-da, da-da. And then for years, we were just like, oh my God, he was guided by spirits. He's like the new Jedi Master. What the hell? All right, we got Kermit the Log in the house. Hail, Kermit. Thank you. These are my brothers. Check out their channels. They have very good YouTube stuff as well. So thanks for being a part of this pilot broadcast. Just kind of explaining who I am and why people should give a fuck, and hopefully laying the ground level for what the show will be like. And then as time goes on, of course, I'll have guests. I like to say that I'm probably the best YouTube channel nobody knows about, but it's funny because everybody in the Fandom Menace knows who I am. If if you haven't seen my channel in particular, then you've seen me in chats and you've heard other people talking about me. So anyway, yeah. The Fandom Menace. This was a very interesting set of people because after all that light-hearted speculation and like, oh, that would be awesome if we were given this, and we should totally be excited about what the possibilities are, and who is this girl who can do all these Force things, but she hasn't been trained. Oh my God, she finds Luke Skywalker. What's going to happen? What happened was Ryan Johnson shit all over us. He made no bones about it, and I know he was happy to do so. You ask him today, he still gets this little ticklish, girlish pork pie, Peter pumpkin eater, goofy little ass smile on his face. He's happy to tease us, poke the bear, as it were. And what I noticed first as a reaction was that people were afraid to say so. They were kind of scared of being put in their place by the shill media. Um, but a group of channels finally did. Um, the first one that I found was actually Mahler. And Mahler had a very scathing review of The Last Jedi. The first video I saw was half an hour, maybe 35 minutes, but it was so good. And Mahler has this like voice that's like sexy butter from like a English London kind of, and he has that sort of like commentator voice that I don't know why, if you have an accent, like a British accent, you just sound more scholarly, even if you're saying things like, flying cock monster, whatever you want to call it. His review was legendary, and I could not believe when I heard it, because it was so right. My personal experience going to see The Last Jedi. Sorry, I just saw you in the chat there, Snow Dove. Yes, actually, my mic's doing pretty well. I got one of those blue eyes things going on. I got a professional popper shield. I got a laptop now. And this is what's crazy. So I'm giving the build up, but the thing was, like, I should have been doing this a long time ago. I just lack the technology, and I don't have big enough tits to get out there and get somebody to sponsor my tech upgrades. So Merry Christmas to me. So yeah, after Mahler, I found Geeks and Gamers. And at the time, Jeremy Griggs and his crew were some of the louder voices in a critique of The Last Jedi. I found Comic Artist Pro Secrets, Ethan Van Sciver, not too long after that. And it's funny because, like, I didn't know he was going to turn into this big Star Wars thing. I just saw that he had drawing tutorials, and I fucked around with comics a little when I was a younger person. Me and my buddy Chris would make up superheroes and draw out stories, and he was better at drawing, but I was better at telling stories. So between the two of us, we came up with some pretty decent stuff. And we would we would draw a book and then go to the copy machine and copy it off, and I'd sell it to my friends for $1 or whatever. Yeah. And then when I found what EVS was talking about as far as like perspective, and here's how you draw the horizon, and here's where all the buildings should be, and then people and their relation. He had a pretty good series where people were sending him their work, and he was going over it and being like, "Now this is cool, but here's what you did wrong." And sometimes he'd take out a piece of paper and redraw a panel. And this is funny because before he was like Howard Stern, he was actually like really like kind of meek in a way. But then he started talking about The Last Jedi, and the thing that really set him off was Rose Tico. He was really mad at her for a little while. He used to cut up toys and draw mustaches on her and whatever, but he's kind of softened up on the character, and she's kind of his mascot now. It's really funny. Let's see what you guys are saying. Snowdub says, "I know if I had titties, I would have 5K subs by now." Ain't that the truth, man? And if I was a female, I probably wouldn't have qualms about shaking it a little bit to get it. But for those of us who are not quite as attractive, now I'm not saying I'm a toad. Did you get that, Logs? Yeah. I'm not saying I'm a toad, but guys that I found in particular, even if you're not super attractive, you have to have something compelling to say. And most of the people who I've seen succeed in this sort of endeavor were people who just sit there and scream at their microphone and lose their mind. And that's just not my style. Now, I definitely like to joke around and be a jackass sometimes, but I even like in arguments with people, if somebody's like pissed off at me and they're screaming and yelling, I don't scream and yell back. I pretty much talk to them just like I am now, this even tone voice, and destroy them with facts. And they hate that. They want you to feed off their negativity, but that's the dark side, right? You know, people are idiots anyway. So let's see. Next, I probably caught world class bullshitters. Um, he had a really funny series where he was going to discount stores and finding Last Jedi stuff marked down so low, like it was beneath $1, and people still weren't buying it. It was fucking piled up to the sky. Like, he's a tall dude. He's like 6'7", something weird like that, and he had piles of toys that were higher than he, taller than he was. I thought that was funny. He used to do this thing called Good Morning Pop Culture, and while I was uh, while I was doing some college classes, I would wake up in the morning and do my work and listen to him go off. It was kind of funny. And then I don't know. I think at some point Griggs and EVS met up at a toy store, and they bought a bunch of Rose Ticos and laughed together, and they decided to put on the High Council. And for a gleaming moment, that show kind of crystallized the essence of what we were all kind of pissed off about. Um, I would say like classic High Council is probably some of the best early Fandom Menace stuff that you can find. Things are a little bit different now. The climate's a little bit different, but I think we can all agree that was probably like the golden era. Um, so I'm drinking Jim Beam, guys. I don't know what you got going, but salud. And I'm backing it with this weird Budweiser that says it has Jim Beam in it. It's a copper lager. I don't know. Let's see. I also found Doomcock around this time too. Now I know people have different opinions about these guys now, but I think we all owe them a little something. And for me, at least, it was getting kicked in the ass and feeling like I wasn't alone and feeling like other people felt like I did. And then it was really fun to be in their shows and send them little super chats and make them say really funny things, and you know, uh, and make friends. Like a lot of the friends that I made in the chat, people now. I saw Rookie Critic in all of those chats a long time ago. I saw Snow Dub and Kermit a little bit later, but these are people who ended up starting their own channels and getting really successful. And at some point when you're watching these guys work, you realize, man, that's smart. And I bet I could do that, but just do it my own way, do my own thing. But then it seemed like every jackass and a hose beast was starting their own channels and calling themselves Fandom Menace. Now it's a play, of course, on the episode 1 of Star Wars, the Phantom Menace, but it's us as fans being dissatisfied with the product that we were handed, and then we were like, we don't like this. They're like, well, if you don't like this, then you're a racist, you're a bigot. Uh, and then there's a Ribbit and Bigot show you guys should watch. That's Snow and Logs. And, they're hilarious. They totally turn it around and make fun of it. Kermit himself, he made up this hashtag called He Too. That's perfect. It's like, take the same logic and spin it back at the people pointing fingers at us. It's like, you're the biggest hypocrite in the room. I'll prove it to you because you won't know what to do with this, right? But then the more people that jumped on this bandwagon, the more that there was a danger, let's say, of diluted content. You have people who are doing the same damn thing. And that's the thing that I noticed these past few months is that many channels, and I'm not going to point the finger at any specific channel, but just know that many of the channels in general are chasing headlines, and they're all reporting on the same like 4 or 5 articles, which is fine. I mean, I think like the big channels, in particular, the ones that have the most audience, probably benefit their audience by doing stuff like that, because otherwise these people aren't going to go out of their way to read the news by themselves. And I kind of, when I watch those channels, I do it for their commentary. So they'll read part of the thing and then like totally make fun of it, or tear it to pieces or apply logic. That's cool. Um, but what I realized for myself is that, well, they're already doing that, so I don't really have to. I should probably try to find some way to uh, make my own contribution, carve out my own niche, as it were. Um, and be careful when you're carving your niche, because you can really miss and then upset your wife or your spouse. Um, but then I started just like thinking about all this stuff. It's like, okay, my life experience and the things that I'm into has given me a unique perspective. Okay, I'm not afraid to talk about like aliens or ghosts or astral projection, or crystals or tarot card, or symbolic mysticism, or things that can't be fit in a particular box. Um, and something else that I've noticed is that, and this is a really famous observation from many other people besides me, but there is an element of the occult um, in entertainment and politics, and um, overreaching through different human experiences in an effort to uh, control our perception of reality, or even our definition of what reality can be. And it bothers me so much that people seem to understand that, or if they do, they're not talking about it. But it's such a nefariously crafted um, illusion that people don't even realize that they're being shown a magic show, and that Oz is really behind the curtain, and it's all smoke and mirrors, right? God, I need some alcohol for that. So, what I'm hoping to do with my channel, and with this broadcast in particular, is to analyze pieces of entertainment from a knowing perspective. Now, I very much intend in the future to have guest panelists help me with this. Just needed to use this initial broadcast to present myself. But let's go ahead and look at some of the inner topics so that you guys can really get where I'm coming from on this. Okay. Um, the first thing that I want to talk about is a little film called Stargate. And Stargate, I'm not a huge Kurt Russell fan, but um, the message of Stargate is interesting because it's very close to um, what our mythological texts tell us about the origin of humanity. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you go back to the earliest sacred texts, you got stuff from Sumer and Akkad, and you got stuff from Egypt. And what does all that stuff say? It says the gods came down from heaven, created Earth, or not Earth, but created humanity, used humanity for agricultural resources. They used us as warriors to fight their wars for them. And they used us as sexual slaves, right? And we're running around doing all that kind of stuff. They're sitting pretty in their palaces that we built for them. And then at some point, they're like, man, there's too many of these motherfuckers. We got to get out of here. They're getting too hard to control. And I believe that they probably had pressure from other forms of intelligence anyway. So they left us alone to our own place. They gave us basic instructions like, okay, you should set up a leader, you should set up a priesthood, you should have your workers and your slaves and your servants and your serfs, and bye, and they took off. The thing that I found interesting about Stargate from that perspective was, even though it took place not on Earth, it took place on an Earth-like planet. We had that situation where there was an extraterrestrial, quote unquote, god with a human slave populace, and no one realized he was an extraterrestrial because he either disguised himself or and so Kurt Russell has to jump in the Stargate and travel to wherever the fuck this is and kick that guy's ET's ass off the planet. and usher in a revolution and be like, no, you guys are intelligent people. You can take care of yourselves. You don't need to lick this guy's asshole because he's just in a spaceship anyway, right? And he's using fear and technology that these people did not understand, so they considered him to be magical. Um, Now it's interesting. There's many episodes of old Star Trek where similar ideas are put out. There's an episode called "Who Mourns for Adonis," and it's the idea is floated out there that Apollo, the sun god, was actually an extraterrestrial, right? Now, from my own research, I don't think that Apollo by name was an extraterrestrial. I think that by the time it got to the Greeks, I'm outside, so hang on, my dogs are barking. Snowdub can understand that. There we go. Uh, I myself don't personally believe that Apollo was a physical being who walked amongst the Greeks. I think that the Greeks themselves actually admit that all of their mythology was borrowed from Mesopotamia, which is the Sumer and Akkad accounts, and they just had different names applied to them. So the writings of Homer, for instance, um, were idealized versions of things that were handed down from before. But what Star Trek did was force us to ask ourselves, well, what if who we believe the gods were are actually visitors from a different planet, right? And whether you believe that they came and found humanity already there, or they, and this is what I believe, had a hand in crafting the genetics that would become Terran humanity, they left their mark. And indeed, even if you go back to those tablets, they didn't call them gods like Judeo-Christian people refer to as God. They called them something else. In the Sumerian Akkadian records, they were called Anunnaki, which means those who from the heavens to earth came. And if that doesn't sound like an extraterrestrial, well, and so it's fun to speculate about that kind of stuff. The ultimate origin of Earth. Most cultures agree that there's an element of the Earth and there's an element of the heavens. So interpret that how you will. Okay. Um, and then this whole question: what is reality? There's a couple of movies that I'd like to kind of point to as a exploration of this topic. Okay. Um, and again, because of some of the experiences that I have a interesting perspective on this. So let's just get into it. The first one I want to talk about, and Rookie, if you don't want spoilers, you should hit mute or go watch some porn or something, is The Matrix. Now, honestly, Rookie, if you're going to watch that, have a watch party, I'd love to be there with you, man, because this movie tore my fucking head off. I saw this in the theater in 98 or 99, whenever it came out. And no shit, guys, I was quiet for like 2-3 days afterwards because I was just going holy shit in my head. I was that weird kid, like when I was in like 6th, 7th grade, X-Files was on the TV, and I was reading like weird stuff. There was this thing on the internet that I remember finding called the Krill Papers. And the Krill Papers very much read like an episode of X-Files would say. It's like, yeah, you know, there's a government, a secret government within the government who has deals with off-world intelligence in exchange for technology, uh, the ability to abduct and experiment on human subject was bargained, right? So, you know, I'm in 6th grade or whatever, and it's scaring the shit out of me, but it more or less matches some of the experiences that I'm talking about. So, with a movie like The Matrix, okay, it's not extraterrestrials per se. It's actually our own creation, AI, and very much in the sense of Terminator, uh, the machines took over humanity and turned us into batteries for them. Now, in order to do that, they had to convince us that the world was still the same. So they uh, put cybernetic implants into each living person and used computer constructs to create a dream world. So what feels like you're walking around or you're going to work and you're doing your taxes and you're eating a ham cheese sandwich, you're actually floating suspended in a liquid nutrient thing that your body can use to feed itself, and you're having a dream life. So you can live your entire life, not realize that you're actually being fed imagery, and everything feels and looks and tastes like it would. Um, and only a handful of humans actually know this. They've been unplugged, um, and they find this guy named Neo who goes and learns how to manipulate the nature of the Matrix. So, without explaining the whole movie, what we're seeing is that Neo learned to use the technology of reality to change the rules of reality. And the real technology of life, I think, is knowable. Now, does it take a great deal of practice to master this? Hell yeah. I don't think any living human in recent memory has mastered it. Most of the stories we have about people who have done so are thousands of years old, but they also didn't have as many distractions at the time. So if you're not sitting there watching The Walking Dead every day, perhaps you'd have a chance to go out into the woods and, groove with nature and figure out how to run some of this stuff. And what Neo does looks miraculous. He's able to stop bullets. He's able to like fly. He's able to change around the perception of things, but he's just doing it from his understanding that the world is different than what everyone else thinks it is. And so, having stepped out of that illusion, he's able to change things to suit his liking. That's what I dig about The Matrix. And that's the sort of thing that, like I said, after I saw it, I was silent for a couple days, right? Uh, the next thing that I want to talk about on this level is a movie called Doctor Strange, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. Now, Doctor Strange is interesting because it marries some of my interests. Okay, I'm a martial artist, like I explained earlier. So things like The Matrix that have a lot of kung fu in it, I dig. Um, Doctor Strange actually had like a astral projection kung fu, you know, um, which is interesting. Now, again, I'm not afraid to admit I've engaged in astral projection. I've laid down, I've come away from my body, I've gone and done stuff, and I came back and woke up and went about my day. Shower, shit, shave, right? Um, I understand that it sounds kind of extraordinary to some people. My friends might not even believe me. I don't give a shit. It happened. Um, but it's not like it was portrayed in Doctor Strange. I did appreciate the attempt, though, because it's not something that's widely talked about. And if it is talked about, it's, well, in the Doctor Strange realm, it's like that. So he gets to leave his body and go and fight Dormammu or whatever he has to do. But that instant where before he has embraced his path, right? He very much he very much was concerned with very human things. He hurt his hands, and he was a surgeon, so he can't work anymore. So he needs to find a way to fix his hands, and he's just concentrating on his physical. When he hears a tip that there's this place called Comartage, and if he goes there, he can learn how to fix his hands. But the way that he learns to fix his hands is to engage in this mystical arts, which they don't really explain what type of mystical arts, but it's enough of an explanation that you're like, oh, okay, he's using metaphysics to mind over matter his body. That's a cool idea. Everything else is just kind of like comic book superhero stuff. So um, that's why I tend to like Doctor Strange. I know it's not like the most popular entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's a necessary one, and I really get where they're coming from on that. Um, and at some point in the future, if you guys are curious about my astral projection, we'll have time to go into that. Let's see here. Okay, I'm gonna move on to a movie called The Prestige, and this is starring Hugh Jackman, the Wolverine. This is starring Christian Bale, Batman, right? And it also is starring David Ziggy Stardust Bowie. David Bowie, yes, yes. Mm. Okay. Now the premise of this movie is kind of simple yet ingenious. Uh, in the Prestige, there are two magicians who are competing against each other for Master Illusionist, and this isn't like Doctor Strange magic. This is like the hand is quicker than the eye kind of stuff. It's like, hey, you got a dollar in your ear kind of stuff. It's like I can saw this woman in half kind of stuff. But everyone's so bored and blasé about these magicians that they don't really even give a shit. Um, so they're trying to find ways to one up each other. And it starts off as like a friendly competition. It's like, yeah, hey, you fucker. Yeah, I'm a better magician than you are. So suck my balls. Just like we do with any of our bros. We got bros that, I can out rap you. Okay, whatever. I can do more push ups than you can. Okay, whatever. I got a bigger dick. Right. Um, but what it ends up happening is that one of the magicians, played by Christian Bale, he has a twin brother that nobody knows about, and he keeps his twin brother hidden, and he pays for everything. So like his twin brother doesn't have to worry about money, he doesn't have to worry about like where to live. He gets to sleep with women and all that kind of stuff. But the big his big finale, he swaps places with his brother, so it looks like he's gonna die or he's something's gonna happen. But his brother steps out and closes down the show, and then he gets out of a straitjacket or whatever, and that's pretty clever. That part of the movie is like people are trying to keep him a secret, but Hugh Jackman's character, not just because he's the Wolverine, is much more interesting because instead of having a twin brother or some sort of secret like that, he goes to David Bowie's character, and David Bowie plays Nikola Tesla. And this is a name that needs to be known. If you don't know who Nikola Tesla is, unfuck yourself right now. Go ahead, I'll wait. Okay, a brief history. Nikola Tesla was an immigrant from Serbia, right? He was I believe it's modern day Yugoslavia. Um, and he was a visionary. He came from Europe, and with a letter of recommendation and like a couple bucks in his pocket, he went to work for Thomas Edison. And a lot of the stuff that Thomas Edison is credited with inventing is stuff he like modified and ideas that Tesla had. But Tesla didn't know how to patent things. So he'd come up with an idea and he'd build a gadget, and then Thomas Edison would buy it from him and patent it and turn it into something great. And it's not only Edison. Tesla, his ideas shaped the modern world. And I'm not bullshitting when I say that. Uh, there was a big controversy. The invention of the radio was credited to a man named Marconi, an Italian guy. But Marconi copied designs of Tesla's. And the American government actually went to the patent office, showed them Tesla's work, and got them to take Marconi's name off of it. So that's a big thing. Um, Tesla also was very big on uh, electricity. His big thing was that he powered the World's Fair in Chicago. And Edison was shitting his pants about it. Um, there was this big debate over like alternating current versus direct current. And they went out of their way to show that Tesla's thing was dangerous, and they electrocuted animals in front of people trying to scare them into it. But Tesla was like, no, I'm not doing it that way. I'm using ultra high frequency. And he would be able to send thousands of volts through his body and hold a light bulb and light up the light bulb with a wireless connection. He was sending stuff through the air. So this idea of like remote control vehicles, all that stuff seemed like it was like out of this world and crazy and just like impossible. Tesla was doing it. And here's the big kicker is that Tesla didn't sit down with blueprint paper and build something and then figure out why it didn't work and go, oh, well, and then try again. He would receive his designs fully formed in his imagination. And sometimes like he would go to bed and dream something and then wake up and build it, and it fucking worked, right? He had a big tower in Colorado called a Wide Cliff. And the purpose of Wide Cliff was to send out free energy to any device that was paired to it, and it would work. The thing about Tesla, and this is the tragedy of Tesla, but also an illustrator of how greedy the people around him were. Tesla was a humanitarian, and he wanted to provide limitless free energy for the benefit of humankind. So imagine that. Most people, they go out and they work all day and they're paying for energy, right? They're buying the gas, they're paying for the power, they're paying for the water, they're paying for the sewer, because we're burning fossil fuel to pump this energy out. Tesla was actually the guy who thought to use the momentum of water to spin turbines to create electricity. So it was at Niagara Falls. That was the one he built. Okay. Need to step away for just a brief moment. I'll be right back. Okay, appreciate your patience. And there's a really famous story with J.P. Morgan. Now, J.P. Morgan is one of those people who, back in Tesla's lifetime, so he was born in the late 1800s and he died in the early 1900s. J.P. Morgan was one of those guys like Rockefeller, who were just like old money, rich beyond stupidity. Like you can't even imagine how rich these people were. But they're also top tier, what you would call Illuminati, right? Tesla designed something like an alternating current motor, right? And this is the thing that like the water pushed and it spun like a turbine, and it was expensive to make. And J.P. Morgan, through one of his satellite companies, were making power plants based on this design. And when it turned out that the type of royalties owed to Tesla would exceed Morgan's ability to pay Tesla, he took out the contract for the royalties and he tore it up, because he says, this is for humanity. This isn't for me to get rich on. I want people to be not worried about this so that they can better themselves. They can go read a book. They can go whatever. Uh, and in the end, he was messing with that wide cliff tower, and they were so impressed by it. They were like, "Oh my god, this is great! We're going to be able to give power to like everybody. How do we meter this? How do we charge it?" And he goes, "No, you don't understand. We're not going to meter this. This is free energy." But you can't say that to entrepreneurs. And they were so scared by this that they destroyed this man. So, if you know the tragedy of Nikola Tesla, watching a movie like The Prestige, where he is an actual character, and in The Prestige, he's presented as kind of a kooky, nutty professor kind of guy. But if you know who Tesla was, and I really think that David Bowie knows who Tesla was or knew. David Bowie has passed. He's probably had the chance to meet Tesla by this point. Um, very excellent casting. Very excellent casting. All right. I got 2 more topics to touch on, and then I will bid you guys adieu. Okay. I am not afraid to admit that I am a big, big Star Trek fan. I love Star Trek. It's one of the best shows, when it's done right, to have ever been made. Now, it sucks because the reality at the time when it was created was that you needed to have a fast-paced action adventure series. But Gene Roddenberry was very much an intellectual. And even in the pilot episode, which didn't get aired for many, many years, it was turned down by the networks for being too cerebral. And he was ordered to go back and create a different approach to it. So he recast the captain, he recast the first officer, he kept the alien, but most of the people had to be swapped out. And he was able to do it in such a way that, because it's the future, because it's a different type of thought process, and because it's science fiction, he was able to use multiracial cast. So he had an Asian guy in there, he had a black female in there, and then more alien cultures than you can shake a stick at. The real message of Star Trek, though, is what's possible. What's possible when we stop fighting with each other and start taking care of each other and solving our problems. Specifically, the big thing I always admired from Star Trek was the matter replicator, the concept of a matter replicator. If you had something like a Tesla tech, which has free energy, you can draw free energy from the ambient atmosphere or from the space between spaces that exist throughout the universe, and use it to power a matter replicator who knows all the molecular patterns and can work something like an instantaneous 3D printer where you don't have to wait. It just like materializes in seconds. Then suddenly our material needs are all taken care of. Literally anything you can think to produce, from food to medicine to shelter, like building materials, can come out of this little slot, and we suddenly don't have to tear up the world to provide for our physical needs. And then once that's taken care of, we're able to turn our attention towards the stars, right? And just like I was talking about earlier in this broadcast, humans have a sense that we are part heaven and we are part earth. So it only makes sense that we would turn our attention back from where we came and want to head back up into those stars and see what's out there. Very powerful stuff. And it's funny because trying to find a way to speak to those points on a week by week basis, when all your audience wants to see is like space battles with Klingons and Romulans, trying to figure out a way to put in the humanity. That was one of the challenges that made Star Trek such a great show. And especially like in Star Trek: The Next Generation, I really think that message was honed to its finest quality. Um, it's a very good show. It's very much worthy of your study. Um, I'll go through a couple of my favorite episodes. There's so many. I guess the one that speaks most to that point of evolution and change and um, humanity's potential wasn't even humanity itself, but there was a episode of The Next Generation called Transfigurations, and in the show, a physical being was being prosecuted by his planet because they were afraid of what he was changing into, and he was evolving from the need for a physical body into like an energy body, um, a non-corporeal energetic existence. um, the final change happened at the very climax of the show, and it gave me chills to see that. um, Another really great episode along those lines was actually in the original series. um, it was a show called Errand of Mercy, very famous show. And in the show, the Klingons are shown to be a brutal military dictatorship, like an authoritarian empire, uh, fought by warrior soldiers who believe might is right and strength should win and this and that and all the things that humanity had visited upon itself in its past. But by the time that it had gotten to the phase where we're interstellar, we have overcome, even though that's still a component of our genetics. And that's the thing that makes the Klingons admire us. But that's also the thing that they wish we would embrace because, otherwise we're weak. So they go to this planet where they seem to have found a primitive society of farmers, like an agrarian lifestyle. These people are walking around in robes, basically taking care of sheep and cows and what have you. And the Klingons go in and try to enforce a spinoff of their empire. This world is now subject to the Klingon Empire, and the people that live there, they're like, "Hey, we're not going to fight you. It's sure you can stay here." And Kirk and Spock are down there. On a they're undercover, so the Klingons don't know that they're Federation, but they figure out that they're Federation, and everybody's getting ready to fight a war. But what they don't understand is that the people on the planet that they're on are so far beyond physical beings that their mental powers are able to stop the Klingons and the Starfleet, no matter what part of space they're in. Really cool stuff. And then the climax of the show is that the inhabitants of the planet are forbidding the Federation and the Klingons to fight each other. And the argument becomes, well, you have no right to stop us from fighting each other, from killing each other. And they're like, this is why you guys have problems, because you're so focused on violence and killing. In the future, you'll be allies and blah, blah, blah. Very cool stuff. Very, very cool stuff. I have one final thing to go over before I let you guys go. As I mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. Star Wars changed my life, as I'm sure it's changed your life. The biggest thing that I can think of contemplatively, because if you want to go through the whole drama of the story, Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, he's a Sith Lord, he killed zillions of people, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's cool. The thing that I ponder upon is the Force itself, because George Lucas figured out a way to distill every religion into something that everyone could understand, but still have it be something bigger. And in the beginning, like in episodes 4, 5, 6, you didn't really need to explain the Force as being produced by some deity or anything like that. He didn't even have many chlorians back then. It was just something that once you sensed and you were trained in, you could utilize. And then every sort of psychic and metaphysical skill or talent that was available, you learned as an extension of using the Force. And it wasn't until the prequels when we started talking about where did Darth Vader come from and where did Anakin Skywalker come from, that some of those things were having to be more grounded in reality, so that people can understand. But you still had that sense that, okay, maybe there is a genetic component to it. Maybe you have to be born of certain people to use the Force, but it's there. And if you can use it, then you can do godlike things. Uh, those still are going to be right. Who knows? Um, Again, that's another time for another story. Um, but that's what's made what's happened to Star Wars so much more heartbreaking, because visionaries who created the movies that I've mentioned, whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or Marvel Cinematic Universe or Bruce Lee or Chris Carter or whoever you want to talk about, um, these are people who were inspired. They had very clear ideas about what they wanted to communicate, and they did it in a way that resonated with humanity, in a way that got us to wonder, to actually stop and consider ourselves and our place in the universe. In the case of Star Trek, there's people whose careers were launched because of it, and they turned around and made their entire lives about trying to invent something that they saw in Star Trek because it was such a good idea. Um, and they do that in particle physics all the time. They finally got to the point where they could transport a proton from across the room to the other side of the room. And even though it's a proton, it's a start, right? A more immediate example is flip phones. You go back to the 60s, you see Kirk calling the Enterprise. He opens up a flip phone and talks to Scotty, and then he gets beamed up to the ship, right? And then we got that. Early 2000s, everybody had a flip phone. That's cool. It's something that was like seemingly impossible. We don't have lightsabers yet, but hey, who knows? Uh, so you go from this place of wonder, of inspiration, and you feel like you can do anything. But the powers that be, they're threatened by that. They can't have us do that. So what do? They try to manage the message, right? So in the case of the Matrix, you have this little reality parable. So what do? Well, you can't have people flying and dodging bullets. You have to turn it into a Jesus Christ story. Okay. With Star Wars, you can't have psychic telekinetic knights running around fighting each other. You have to make it about midi-chlorians, and then you have to make it about representation and gender studies and all this weird shit that goes on college campuses. They're really trying to take the wonderment out of it and instill a perception of reality that's just not. It's contrary to what the freedom our souls were created out of, to possess and to own. You might not even believe you have a soul. That's up to you. This is just what struck me, and that's the savage spirituality perspective. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming out. I knew that I'd only have a couple of viewers this first time, but as a record of intent and a statement of intent for the future, I know people are going to listen to this and be like, "Yep, that's where it all started." It's pretty cool. Check out my YouTube channel. I will continue to create videos, at the very least weekly. I hope to make this show a weekly show, and next week be back with some guests. that can help me look into these kind of things a little bit longer. And then who knows, explore some of the deeper things in life, and really consider ourselves and our abilities, and what we're able to achieve together. Um, Check out my other brothers and sisters in the Fandom Menace. Our logo and our hashtag are out there. I mentioned a good bunch of people earlier. Check them out. Check me out on Twitter. My name is at immortal_coil. And we will talk to you later. Have a good one.